to this I'd like to welcome everybody to this special jurist event with jurist journalist in residence Toni Locy and NPR International Affairs correspondent Jackie Northam. I want to welcome all of our staff from literally all over the world here to this particular event. I see you here from India and from Afghanistan and from Kenya and from Myanmar and from the US. This is really quite extraordinary, and for Mauritius. This is really quite extraordinary as a collection of jurist staffers from around the world, and we are delighted to have you with us this afternoon, our time, although we also recognize that for you, it is a very late in the evening, probably in many cases. So we especially appreciate your presence. I'm going to turn the proceedings over to our journalist in residence, Toni Locy, who some of you heard from a couple of weeks ago when she spoke to staff at that event. Toni will introduce our speaker in greater detail. So Toni, I will turn this over to you and we will talk about reporting in conflict zones.
Great, thank you, Professor. When we met a couple weeks ago, and I started to field questions from you all about the intricacies of reporting from conflict zones, the first person who popped into my head that I thought you should talk to is Jackie Northam. Jackie is someone I consider a good friend, and she has reported from everywhere. From London, from Budapest, Phnom Penh, Nairobi. She covered the fall of communism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. She was in Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. She's been to Afghanistan and covered the conflict there. And we met, Jackie and I met at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where we were roommates. We were roommates. And we were there covering the Bush administration's failure at trying to create military commissions to try the people who had been rounded up in Afghanistan and elsewhere around the world and were labeled as suspected terrorists. I thought that Jackie would be the best person for you all to talk to and to field your questions about what sorts of things to expect in conflict zones and how to protect yourself and your sources while you're there. So Jackie, it's your show.
Okay, should I just give you, I guess, a little bit more of what Toni was talking about? I've been doing this for about 35 years now. Which is kind of amazing because I actually never studied journalism, and I was living in a place called Edmonton, Alberta, when I decided really that I wanted to be an international correspondent, and that was because of a woman named Anne Medina. And Anne Medina was with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and I watched her on TV night after night after night, and she was covering the civil war in Lebanon, in Beirut, and she was always standing there with her white shirt tucked into her jeans and the smoking carnage of Beirut behind her. And I really don't know what that says about me, but that's where I had to be. That exactly was where I had to be. That's what I wanted to be. It was a little bit difficult because I wasn't a reporter, and I was in Edmonton, which is halfway up Canada, very cold in the winter. But I found I kind of made my way in a very long and twisted turn. I started in London. I just picked up my sticks in Edmonton and ended up in London, got myself into the CBC there, started reporting, taking a recorder and a microphone out with me on a lot of my holidays. My holidays there would be like, communist Czechoslovakia or, these kind of things. It wasn't, well, there was a few Paris moments, but it was basically, I started getting my chops for reporting there. After about 7 years in London, it was wonderful, but I had gone to Czechoslovakia, and at that time it was Czechoslovakia, and the authorities there did not want to give up communism. And I was there at a time when there were protests, and there was one moment where the secret police, the VAPOs, charged everybody in a protest, and I got beat up is too strong a term. I got roughed up. They smashed my equipment. They everything like that. And I thought, oh man, I want to live here. This is great. Like I said, I'm not really sure what's wrong with me. That's for a different part of my life. I'm going to have to stop and figure. The Czechoslovakians wouldn't let us in, but the Hungarians did. So I moved to Budapest. I picked up my sticks again in London and moved to Budapest. While I was there, I covered the fall of communism. I got to the first Gulf War. If you remember, when the Americans went to Saudi Arabia, and this is when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait and pushed them out. That was my first war. And I was in Saudi Arabia, so I didn't see what happened when the missiles landed in Iraq. I didn't see the carnage that took place. We were not allowed in there. Fast forward a little bit, I ended up in Nairobi. I was in Phnom Penh for a while, in Bangkok. I ended up in Nairobi. And about 2 months after I got there, Rwanda broke out. And the genocide, pardon me, in Rwanda. And there was only a small group of journalists, maybe a dozen, who actually were in the country when the slaughter of Tutsis was happening. And I was one of them. We basically had to hitchhike in to Rwanda. We got picked up by a Tutsi, a priest, a Catholic priest, and he took us into Rwanda because all the borders were closed, the airport was closed. And to this day, I mean, I've covered 5 wars now, lots of conflict. That was by far still the worst because it was so basic, it was so bloody. At one point going in to Rwanda the first time, I had a machete to my neck. We ended up having to buy a car of somebody to get. We ended up in Hotel Rwanda, the Mille de Collines. But it was just, you know, how, I guess, you know, when I started off, like I said, I wanted to be a war correspondent. There was just something about the excitement and being there and everything like that. Well, let me tell you what, when I covered Rwanda, it was, you know, it stays with me to this day because you could just, I understood, unfortunately, what man was capable of doing to man, what mankind was capable of doing, you know, the cruelty. It was a dangerous, dangerous assignment and everything else. And it took me a long time to get over Rwanda, to the point where I actually came back from overseas. I'd been there 12 years and I got a visa to, a work visa to the United States. And I stayed here. I didn't go anywhere overseas for a few years. But then I got in with NPR, who I work for now. And what they wanted was somebody who had foreign chops, which is what I had. And so I did start going back overseas again. I covered Iraq, I covered Afghanistan. I've been in there many, many, many times. I used to go in for a month, every other month, basically, there or Pakistan kind of thing. I finally got to Beirut, and it was during a war, a conflict with Hezbollah. So I finally got to Beirut, which is where, what started my career. 3 times I've been covering the Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah kind of thing, and it never ends. And, I was there in May. They sent me back. I just got back from Pakistan, 3.5 weeks there. I got there just when Afghanistan was starting to fall apart. So even though I don't want to be on the road all the time now, it's my job and you have to do it. And I do. I've got a reputation as a fireman, which is basically, if something's happening, you go. And I've got that because I've been doing it long enough. They trust me that I can get on the ground, I can get sorted out fast, and I can start reporting. But I'm 62 years old now, and NPR, to their credit, is starting to nurture some younger journalists in that. And I'm mentoring a gal now, Fatma Tanis. She was in Saudi Arabia with me a couple times, and that's where I am with my career. People always ask me, well, how do you wash your hair during a war? Well, that's a pretty good question. Quite often you don't. People ask me, how do you eat food? Well, during Rwanda, I was eating meals ready to eat from the Canadian military. The Canadian military stayed there. It's a really very, very strange profession. I wouldn't have traded it for the world. I've seen history being made, but I truly have witnessed. That's my dog digging my Persian carpet behind me, if you can hear. I've just seen, I think, a little bit too much of the world right now, a lot of misery. Again, a lot of stupidity and cruelty and selfishness, but I've also seen some really wonderful, wonderful things along the way. And I've just been very, very lucky people have given me chances all along the way. I'm self-taught. I didn't go to school. And that's why when Toni asked me to come and talk, absolutely, you go talk, because I have a lot of payback to give. So I'll leave it there. That's really condensed version of my life. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And there's no stupid questions, right, Toni? No, never. So, anyone?
Toni, you may be muted, or how do you want to proceed?
You can see who might want to ask a question, but I know last time that we talked, there were questions about security, because the law students, I don't know if Jackie, you noticed, but some of them we're not using their names on their dispatches for security reasons.
Definitely.
But what kind of advice, sort of basic advice, would you have for them to keep themselves and their sources safe? Well,
it's two different things. Definitely yourself and sources are definitely two different things. For yourself, for us, it's changed a lot. When I started off, again, there was one time I was going into Rwanda. I was flying with the Canadian military, and they said, when we're 2 minutes out of Kigali, put on your flak jacket. I had no flak jacket. And then, and then put on your helmet. I had no helmet. Nothing. People asked, do you take a gun with you when you go on assignment? No, absolutely. You cannot be armed. It has changed a lot over the years. There is a whole industry now devoted to securing journalists. And it's actually pretty tiresome, I have to say. When I went out to Peshawar in Pakistan, along the Pakistan-Afghan, I had to, check in every hour and that sort of stuff. But we lost a photographer in Afghanistan in an ambush, and NPR is very, very conscious of this. Protecting your sources is absolutely paramount, especially if you're in places like Afghanistan. Even for me with Saudi Arabia, I remember one guy said, and we all know about the Crown Prince, and what he is capable of doing, killing and dismembering people who voice opposition to him. I remember talking to some fellow who was like a banker, and he was very open about his opposition to the Crown Prince and that he thought the kingdom wasn't going. And he willingly gave his name. We didn't use it. We could not use his name. If you're in places like Afghanistan or Myanmar, where it is authoritarian rule, you can't use your name. Now, NPR, we don't like to use pseudonyms. We don't like to make up somebody's name. We will say, if we do say whatever the person's name is, who refers to just by her first name, we'll explain why, so our listeners know. But we are so conscious of how some of these, again, autocracies or whatever it is, military ruled countries or anything like that, what they are capable of doing. And certainly with social media now, before it used to be just like the BBC World Service a million years ago when I started. It was so limited what a country could hear. But now with social media, it's, stuff ricochets around the world in a heartbeat. So whatever you do, even if they say, like they did to me in Saudi Arabia, oh yeah, it's okay, you can use my name. If you know the situation, if they're naive or whatever, not caring, or maybe just checked out, if they're given their name, don't use it. Really don't. If there's any hint, any whisper that somebody could be in trouble, don't use it. Don't use their name. Don't even, sometimes they say the first name, like Jim, who runs a clothing shop. You know what? The government can track down Jim in that clothing shop pretty easy. So it's really, the onus is on you to make sure that you do not put the people that you're talking to in jeopardy. It's just, you just can't do that.
Toni, can I jump in and ask a question here just to frame things a little bit? So Jackie, these are law students, obviously, and just like you, when you started, they're coming from a position of being total outsiders to the world of journalism. They haven't got any experience, but they're picking up some of this as they're going along. And some of them are doing it because they're interested in doing it and they're in relatively stable circumstances. Some of them are doing it because they are in highly unstable circumstances. So, several of our staff, a couple of them here actually, who are from Myanmar, have sort of turned themselves into journalists to some extent, trying to report on things that are happening, all around them, literally perhaps on their streets. And they've been covering events that they've been participating in directly. Others, including some of our students in Afghanistan, are obviously looking around literally at what is happening to their country, and they're trying to translate that for themselves at the same time as they're trying to translate that for us and inform us about what is going on. How do you successfully, from someone who's kind of done this in another context, how do you successfully turn yourself into a journalist when your identity isn't originally postured that way, when you see yourself originally as something else and the transition isn't even planned necessarily? I mean, you decided you would go towards journalism in a sort of conscious, deliberate sense. To some extent, some of these folks, some of these law students are pulling themselves in that direction simply because they feel it's the only thing they can do in the circumstances to do something positive. What do you say to them to help them make that transition and actually become journalists in some way, shape, or form under the conditions that they're facing?
Yeah. Well, first of all, bravo and good on you, because in some of these, Myanmar, Afghanistan, everything, you have to be pretty darn brave to be, letting the word out about what's happening. Seriously, I take my hat off to all of you. I think Toni could tell you. Toni, studied law and went to journalism. I think about Adam Liptak, who's a Supreme Court correspondent. He has a law background. I think if people are drawn to it, to want to record, to this moment in time or whatever, then I don't know if that's something you want to suffocate. I really don't, and I think you have to follow it. But talk about security. I mean, and I don't know, for the people that you're talking about, I don't know where their work is ending up. I mean, is it in a newspaper? Is it social media? I just don't know. But I do know the draw of wanting to do this work, wanting to explain to the world, or to just be witness to something and let others read about it or hear about it or stuff like that. It's a very powerful draw. I think Toni could definitely tell you that. And yeah, just the security, the risk that they're taking, I just hope everybody is just being careful. But it's, good on them, really good on them. Is that what you were looking at? I mean, I don't know how you explain the draw into journalism other than that,
No, that's
Not
fine.
for the money.
That's fine, Jackie. I mean, I know they're navigating it. They're making it up as they go along, and obviously.
So did I.
Yeah. Exactly, and it's possible
So
to do it, and that's one of the things I wanted to get across. And I'm glad you said what you.
Yeah, and again, people helped me all along the way. I could never pay back enough for people giving me a chance. I was pretty tenacious, sure, but people helped me, and I think people will help them too, whether, and you do find your footing, you do find, I made some glorious mistakes, my gosh, over the years, really. And I had no idea about the pyramid system where the most important thing is on top and all the background, I had no idea about that. I couldn't put together a sentence at all. And as I said, I have a lot of payback. So.
We're trying to provide some of that today and some of that guidance, and I appreciate that. Toni, I think we have a question from Shakira actually on the call here. Shakira, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. First of all, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. A follow-up question to yours, Professor Abbott. And first of all, I need to tell Jackie, what you do is really brave. That's the only word I can say. And what you have done is absolutely great and awesome. My question is regarding how you manage mental health.
Oh.
You have been in different wars, and being inside a war is difficult, and it definitely effects on your mental health. I want to start writing. I'm putting myself in the position. I started writing in different times as a person who just got out, and I have seen a lot during the way crossing the border, and yet I have to overcome everything. But for you that you have reported over 5 wars, in managing all, seeing everything, the murders, from the killings to the blood and everything, how you manage that?
It's not easy. In all honesty, it's not easy. Again, when I started this career, it was all exciting. Rwanda really knocked it out of me in a big way. I mean, just again, one of the journalists that I was with a lot in there, we talk about it, he's a South African, and we talk about it afterwards. It's just, we saw evil, and it is really in its purest form. It took me a long time to get over that. I didn't go see a mental health person or anything else like that. And at the end, I kind of came to the conclusion that it was an aberration, that mankind really wasn't, that it was just one of those one-off things, that overall mankind is not like that, and that helped me for a long time. And and time helps as well, after a few years. But I'm not 100% sure about it anymore, because I have just seen too much, I think. And then I look around here in Washington, where frankly, it is so ugly politically. And just, I feel saturated. And when my mom died, she wanted What a Wonderful World, Louis Armstrong song, because that's how she felt, that it was a wonderful world. And I wish I could have that. And so I don't have the balance. I have a dog now, which actually sounds weird, but she brings me so much joy that, when you're sitting at home with COVID and you're covering all this stuff, she kind of balances it, because she brings me happiness. But it is really hard. It's really hard. Yeah, it's just a crappy world sometimes. It really is. And you have to keep finding the beauty. And I don't want to get involved in therapy or that. I think I just I don't know. I just want to try and find it my own way. But I mean, you've obviously seen, you've already had a taste of it. And you can see 35 years of that. It's hard. It's really hard. It is probably one of the hardest parts of the job, to be honest. Yeah.
We have another question, Toni. So go ahead, Nazni.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. I'm really happy to see you all. I just have one question. Dear Jackie, how do you see the world right now after all of that?
Well, I have good days and bad days. Let's put it this way. I work really hard to try and find the bright side of the world. It's hard here in Washington because it is so politically ugly right now. And, we have the specter of Trump coming back in and, what that'll do. And if you're in the news business, I read 5 papers in the morning. You're not reading stuff about, happy things. You're reading stuff that either is going wrong or could go wrong. So right now, my vision of the world is not good. And I understand that's where I am right now. But I'm going to retire in a couple of years. I'm not going to read the papers every day. I'm going to stay away from the news because I think the news business is tough. So that's all kind of doom and gloom. I think there is a lot of good in the world, and I think hopefully we will try and right the course. Hopefully we will start doing something about the climate. Hopefully we will start thinking better ways about immigration, not going to war, stuff like that. But right now it's, as I was saying earlier to Shakira, it's a little bit tough right now. Yeah. Sorry.
Toni, I think we have a question from Kushali in India. Kushali.
Hi, Jackie. I'm from
Hi.
India. I'm JURIST India staff. So I just have one question. In this world, we say that everyone's attention has become really, really short. Everyone's craving for the trendiest news. So it's like, do you ever feel the pressure to make your reporting more out there? Like, do you ever feel the pressure that what you're reporting has to be there at the top of the news, because everyone's just craving for whatever's trendy? Like, today you hear a news and tomorrow it's just vanished because something new has happened. And that's largely because there's so much information out there. So do you ever feel that pressure when you're reporting things, that perhaps if it were more exciting, people will pay more attention to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm competitive by nature, so I want my stuff high up in the news. But you always want to improve your writing, even, 3.5 decades on, you always want, and I've really worked hard over the past, probably 2 or 3 years. I've really focused on making it brighter, sharper, faster, because I think that's the way that, you're right, news has trended. But I don't think I've ever let the content suffer for that reason. And, my stuff will still get on air, and it's not all jazzy. It needs to have substance to me at the end of the day still. But there are definitely, and I've worked hard at this to make it snappier and brighter, and that, because people will, that's what people want. And part of the thing that you're sort of indicating, I think, is sort of like with social media as well. I mean, stuff gets turned around very fast. What happens, or what is at jeopardy, is that the information is wrong or not quite firmed up yet, which is, you can't do that. And NPR is still very careful about that. It still really is. We prefer to be slow, and at least try to be right, rather than fast and apologize after. We don't want to do that. So yeah, there is that trend. We're radio, and we were always radio, but now we have a digital presence, and it's growing. It has skyrocketed during COVID. And so now they want us to turn out digital stuff as fast as we can as well. Sort of in an AP, like Associated Press form or Reuters form or something like that, just get it out. Which I'm fine with, we can do, but more than anything, just the thought of getting something wrong just makes me shake. I don't want to do that. Even with headlines that can be misleading, and actually the journalists at NPR, the headline writers, they hear about it. If we think that headline is misleading, they get an earful all the time. Sometimes, a snappy opening, a great, quirky, wonderful opening, but quite often they can be misleading as well. There's nothing worse than to lose a beautifully crafted sentence because it's misleading, but it's misleading. It's got to go. So really, to answer your question, this is exactly what's happening. Even with, the old gray lady, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, even the Financial Times, which are really staid newspaper, they're trying to jazz it up, liven it up as well, because things evolve, right? That's what you want, but you just don't want to get it wrong. That's the only thing. Social media is a pretty dangerous little vehicle. It's it's easy to get things wrong. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Kushali. I appreciate that. We've got a whole lineup here, Toni, of questions. This is fantastic at this point. So I'm just going to help you go through them here. I think we've got Vishu next. Vishu, you're on if you can connect.
Sorry. So hi, Jackie. Sorry for the connection issues. I'm here from Mauritius. So I had a question on behalf of the Afghan and Myanmar law students that have contributed too much. and I've seen the struggles that they've gone through in their reporting, and I feel extremely depressing. I know it's even worse for them, but for us here who are in I guess safer jurisdictions, it's even more depressing to hear from them. And I wanted to ask you, from your experience, you've been to war zones all around the world throughout the ages. Are there any good experiences that you would like to share post-conflict where you've seen the countries emerge better, brighter, people have gotten a better future? And do you think something that would brighten up the law students in Afghanistan and Myanmar and tell them that, yeah, in the future years ahead, they might have a future that they can reconnect with the world again? So any views on that aspect? Thank you.
Well, thank you for allowing me to brighten up the conversation as well. Sorry, I was getting pretty depressing there, folks. But you got to be honest, right? Yeah, there's been a lot of great stories that I've covered. And actually, really one of them was in Afghanistan as well, where you just watch, people coming in from during the elections. It seems so long ago now, but people were just, they ignored the fact that militants could be out there and there could be attacks, and they had the bravery to go out and vote. I remember that one very, very clearly. It's too bad. Yeah, there are a lot of good stories out there, and that's why I think the news business always focuses on the bad a lot. I've seen a lot of good things. I've seen a lot of the good side of humanity all along the way. People who have, stepped up when they didn't need to. People have put their own life on the line to save another, that sort of thing. There's sort of isolated incidents, but there's some pretty wonderful stuff. As far as Myanmar, last time I was in Myanmar, it was called Burma, so that's how long ago it's been since I've been there. But as far as Myanmar and Afghanistan go, I know it's looking pretty bleak right now. But you just don't know. Afghanistan, we don't know what's going to happen. The last time the Taliban came in, they were welcomed in. This time they're not. There's a whole generation that has grown up without the Taliban. So there might be a backlash. The Taliban needs money. So they need to try and adhere, or at least some parts of the leadership, they need to adhere to some norms, if they want foreign aid to help. That's a sliver of hope for me. I don't know. We don't know how this is going to end up, and we know the Taliban are split. Myanmar, I don't know. The generals, at one point they tried to bring democracy, and then they clamped down again. I don't know what it'll be to try to bring democracy again. I just don't know. I really don't know. I wish I could give you a better answer about those two countries, but I think the people in those countries might have a better idea than I do anyway. So sorry, that's not probably the best answer, but I'm not
No,
sure.
it's fine. I guess it might be tough times right now, but we have to always aspire for the best, I guess. So my prayers go with them.
Yeah,
Good luck,
you never, yeah, mine too, definitely. You never know, what a population can do. I mean, even if you think about China right now, with climate change, with this economic disaster that's looming, their housing economic disaster, you don't know. I think you don't know what happens when people rise up. We saw it with communism. We never thought communism would go away, and well, it's gone. So you have to hang on to a sliver of hope, I guess. So.
Thank you, Jackie. I think we've got two US staffers here with questions, so I'm going to go to Gabby first. Gabby, you're on.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jackie. Thanks for
Hi.
joining us today. My question kind of relates back to what Kushali was talking about, and somebody else, I apologize, I forget who asked about protecting sources, but I'm interested to know your experience and or if you have suggestions for some of the students that are in conflict zones right now, how you navigated maybe incorrect and or purposely false information from the government in different conflict zones that you were in, and how you kind of balance your need to actually produce the work that you're doing and dealing with things that are fed to journalists that aren't necessarily accurate.
Yeah, that happens here too. Let's not forget. You don't need to be in a conflict zone. You can just be in Washington. But yeah, again, yeah, that's a good question as well. You know, I used to go into Afghanistan a lot. Like I said, I was always there, it seemed. And one of the reasons why I kept going back is because the U.S. kept changing its story while it was there. You know, it kept changing the goalposts, frankly. And I actually really worried about this. If you brought in a new journalist, or that would be what they believed. When you have to remember the full context of why they went in there and why they were changing their mandate is because the other one failed. And that was really important to me, to keep charting that as you go along. A lot of these countries, the misinformation, the propaganda is enormous. Sometimes, I mean, you always have to let them have their word, let them have their say. But then you can just balance stuff out by facts. You can balance stuff out by talking to as many people as you can. You know, if they say the economy is doing great over here, and then you go talk to people where they can't buy bread, they're so broke, you know, that kind of thing. Always try to use examples, but you do always have to, I mean, any story, let's say I do on Saudi Arabia, I always get hold of the embassy here, because we have to allow them a chance to reply. 9 times out of 10, they don't answer my emails, but that's fine. You always have to give them a chance, but then always get the other side as well. And you know, if you're writing a story, Toni, you wouldn't, I mean, back me up on this. You always just give, again, examples of, and just let the facts speak for themselves. You can never say this is a lie. That's because, or you can never editorialize on anything. But if you present the listener, the reader, the viewer with enough facts, then hopefully, if they're switched on enough, that they will see that it is just propaganda or it's misinformation. Having said all that, we have anti-vaxxers here in the States. There's so much misinformation going on here. It doesn't matter how much information, evidence you give them about what a vaccine will do and what it won't do, people still don't believe it. So, but all you can do is present as many sides as possible, you know. And NPR, well, you're in the States, hopefully you listen to it. We're always seen as neutral. Well, nobody's really neutral, are they, right? I think the difference with NPR is we talk to we put a whole bunch of voices in there. So we give the listener a whole array of information, of options about what the story is, what the issue is, and let it go from there. But, you know, I worked, you know, in communist countries. You want to talk about misinformation. Lack of information is the other issue, you know, where they don't tell anything. Look at China. China's just king of it, you know. It's amazing. Yeah, it's just part of the job, but it's a really good question. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah, all right.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabby. Joshua, I think you're on from the US.
Hi, Jackie. In practical terms, when reporting from a conflict zone, what are some things that you know now that you wish you had known when you started? And are there any specific mistakes that you've made that you can help our writers avoid?
Yeah, you know, the big thing that's changed for me is that when I went in at the beginning, all I'd be doing is reporting on what I'm seeing. Now, first of all, I'm usually following the issue before it is actually become a conflict. And so I've got that context, but my reporting really incorporates what it all means, not just what I'm seeing. I definitely still have, you know, this shootout happened here, or that massacre happened there, or something like that. But my reporting is much, much more contextual now. It's much more rounded. It's starting something before, I can't remember, but it's substantial in it. And, you know, I could look back at my, you know, the first Gulf War, you know, I mean, it was you know, not superficial, but it was pretty thin, you know, and that's the difference here. But the other part is, again, leading up to it. You know, I was overseas for 12 years. And then when I came to so covered conflicts over there, And then when I've moved here, and now that I've lived in Washington long enough, I see how policy is made. And it want to make you cry, seriously. I remember, talking to senators, in Afghanistan. I've just come back from Afghanistan. It's safe there. I walked into the market. It was easy. These guys are ringed with securities, like, you could not penetrate. So therefore, darn it, it's going really well in Afghanistan. We're creating those amazing Afghan army. And it's not true. None of it's true, but it was enough for them to come back and make policy about what the US is going to do in Afghanistan, or how and it's just not true. So all that is part of my reporting now. And I like to think it's more robust. I think it's meatier, and I think it explains things more than just saying, oh, 100 people were killed in that missile attack, and oh, this and oh, that. That's color. That's not what the story is.
Thank you.
I see in the chat, I think Nini can't turn her camera or mic on. And she was asking, I think, Jackie, what she's getting at here is that, how do you keep from becoming numb to the brutality, that you see?
I wish I was numb, actually. I wish I could become numb, just keep shooting up full of Novocaine or whatever like that. Actually, this is sort of anecdotal. I'm not sure if it's going to answer your question, but let me put this out there. Several years ago, I'm not sure if you remember the earthquake in Haiti, just thousands of people were killed. There were no building codes. And so when this massive earthquake came, it just flattened everything. Anyway, they sent me down, and we sat all day on a tarmac because the airport was closed, the runway was buckled, and no radar. But anyway, after 12 hours, they finally let us fly and land on this buckled runway with no radar, and that was good. Anyway, we got out, it was pitch black, and we commandeered this truck, basically, and we had heard of a hotel that, while damaged, was functioning, so we were going to get there. To get to the hotel, you had to drive basically around piles of bodies. It was that bad. And that was night one. And it kind of got bad like that. It was like that for a long time. And the Icelandic search and rescue team had come in, and I hooked up with them about 2 days later, and we went out, and they were trying to see if a primary school had collapsed with all the children in it. And I did a story on them. They were just listening for any sound of any child still alive. So it was a pretty intense, I wasn't there that long because I had to have eye surgery, but a week, maybe 10 days. Anyway, I came back to Washington, and our executive editor called me at home, and he says, Jackie, how you doing? And I said, oh, I'm fine. I'm making tuna fish casserole, and I'm going to go skiing tomorrow, and I'm going to do that. And he must have thought, who is this monster? She's just gone through this. She's seen all this tragedy, and she's just happy and bright and everything else like that. And he didn't say that to me, but you could tell. And I put down the phone, and it was probably only the next day that I realized what I must have sounded like. And I talked to a good friend of mine, and she says it's kind of like probably being a nurse in an emergency room, or a first responder or something like that, is that after a while, you just end up protecting. You cannot let stuff get to you. You have to protect yourself, otherwise you can't, you can't do your job. Yeah, but it still does get to you, it does. I tell you what really got to me recently was when all the Syrians were coming across, probably about 5 years ago or something like that, and nobody was letting them in. And that poor little kid, that 4-year-old, ended up on the beach in Adnan. Yeah. I mean, we got to pick this conversation up. I got see what happens.
So as a woman, Jackie, you know, I know that you've told me that, you know, when you've gone to Saudi Arabia and other places, I mean, you've had to adapt the way you dress and act in those countries. Are there other sort of obstacles that women face in particular?
Yeah, you know, I've never really had a problem. In fact, there's always a moment of time where they're actually will help you. Men will actually help you wherever you are. But it can change very, very quickly at the same time. I've always been very, very careful to dress appropriately. You know, you know, it's a different culture. That's how they dress. You dress that way. There's no question. I'm not, you know, cavalier about any of this stuff. So I'm respectful, and I think that has helped. You know, I think you get the same thing sometimes like you get here as well, where, you know, a certain sort of chauvinism is just sort of ingrained. You know, again, it happens here as well, but I haven't really had a problem with being a woman. Now, one thing is I'm 5'10", and I got attitude. So don't mess with me. But you do have to be careful. I mean, during the Arab Spring in Tahrir Square in Egypt, in Cairo, women just, the crowds were so big, and it was a very dangerous situation. So a lot of women were, you know, they had a lot of problems there. It doesn't matter how you dress, you were going to have a problem there. So you just have to be really careful about not getting in that situation, then just hoping for the best if you are in it. Crowds scare me more than anything else, to be honest, large crowds. So, yeah.
So the big protests, those are the ones that you.
Yeah, they really tear. I'm claustrophobic by nature anyway, but crowds can change very, very fast. And I have been in some, but one of my first things that I did when I moved to London was a protest, and it was an anti-apartheid protest. And you have to be careful what side you're on. If you're on the one side, the police don't want you reporting what they're doing. If you're on the other side, you're with the police or military, if you like, on the other side. So you have to be very, very, very careful, because the dynamics can change very, very quickly. It scares me just thinking about it, getting into a crowd if you're behind and you cannot escape. You know, you always, always, always have to have your escape route in mind, always. And the other thing is you never run. I was in Bangkok, and it was when there, you know, a civilian politician had won, but then the military didn't like that. So they were coming in to take power again. And there were all these protests for a couple of weeks. And one night I was down there, you know, the protests were getting big. It was getting big. And the military came in. You could see them on the horizon, all these forces coming in. And instead of shooting rubber bullets at the crowd or live bullets into the air, they shot live bullets into the crowd where I was. And I turned and started running, and I felt somebody grab my knapsack, and it was my boyfriend who was with the Financial Times, and he had done a lot of township violence in South Africa. And he whirled me around and he says, "You never run. You never run. It creates panic in you and the crowd." The crowd was all running as well. You slow down. And that was a real lesson, which I've applied ever since. The thing is, you start running, you start losing, you know, thousands of people are running. You have to maintain control as much as you can about your surroundings. So those are very scary, protests and that sort of situation. Yeah, I don't like them.
Toni, we have about 5 minutes left on the clock. I don't know. I think we probably have time for one more question if somebody
my
wants to
answers
jump
are
in.
really long-winded, aren't they? I'm sorry.
Your answers are great, Jackie. They're
Sorry,
wonderful.
they're not concise at all.
No, they're great. They're great. I just want to make sure that somebody else can get in with a quick question if they have something at the end here. Yes, now we've got some. Okay. So Vincenzo, I'll turn it over to you in Myanmar.
Yes, thank you, Professor. First, Jackie, thank you for sharing your experience when you talk about like when the gunshot happened in the protesting group. It literally reminds me of the experience I had just a few months ago. I was literally in the crowd, and it is true that what you said out of your experience, it goes crazy when you start running. But for the protester, we have to run first because we want to survive. We have to be alive to go on next day. But for a journalist, you might have to take photos and you have to do some record at that time. Even though other people are running, you might have to remain at that place and take the photos. At that time, what is happening in your mind?
Right. I started off as a photographer, actually, in my career. And I've always been around photographers wherever I am on assignment, and they are without doubt the bravest in the world, because I can stand back if it really starts hitting the fan and still report. I can put my mic out, a shotgun mic, so it's got a long range, and still report. Photographers, if they're doing their job, they have to be there. And we lost a photographer in Afghanistan, David Gilkey, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. And I've known other photographers who have died. I don't know, boy, if that isn't brave. I mean, that is true dedication. If you're there, and again, even in a crowd, you start taking pictures of the police, roughing people up, or you start taking a protesters firing stuff at the military, whatever, you're a target. It's as simple as that, yeah. I don't have to take pictures. And here's the other thing for me too. Same boyfriend, Financial Times guy, he said, no war is ever worth dying over, and it just isn't. And I will not put myself in harm's way. I'll go into situations where I know it can turn nasty and that, but I will not walk into the middle of a firefight. It's just not worth it. I've got to be alive to tell the story. So, but but photographers, man, very brave.
Thank you, Jackie. Toni, do you want to say anything towards the end? I may say a couple of things right as we close here, but I want to hand it back to you.
I just want to thank Jackie for being so honest and candid with the students here. I think that because yes, they're law students, but they are telling stories, and they're on the ground. They're living these conflicts, and they're providing first-person accounts that are incredibly valuable, to the public, to the world at large. But I just wanted to thank you for sharing.
I hope it was helpful. Yeah, I hope it was helpful.
I want to reiterate and reinforce what Toni said, Jackie. This was really tremendous. I really appreciate your forthright, description of everything, and taking us through, what you've experienced on such a personal level, and all of that, and the students' questions, reminds me of how important it is that we realize that we're all doing this together in a variety of ways. I mean, you worked within, and you still work within, respected journalistic organizations where journalists and others support each other while they're doing this important work. Whether it's you and your boyfriend, or whether ex-boyfriend, point noted, whether it's you and your ex-boyfriend, or whether it's you in other more traditional environments. But certainly on Jurist, in this kind of environment, the most important thing we can do while any of us is doing work that's at all similar to this is support each other and be sympathetic towards each other. And I heard that in the questions today. I heard that in Vishu's question from Mauritius. Everybody in this organization is very sensitive to the circumstances that our colleagues and friends and students are in these other jurisdictions around the world. We do hear what they are saying, not just as reports, but we hear what they are saying emotionally as human beings. We sympathize. We try to understand as best we can. We will do whatever we can to support them as they are trying to simply continue in these situations that they're in and tell their stories. And we will try to assist them as they technically do that, but we want to assist them as they simply try to go on with their lives in a variety of ways, because that's important. I think it's especially important in an academic organization like JURIST, where they are students and some of us are professors, and we have, a joint dedication to improving people's lives in a variety of ways by education or otherwise. So it's on that note that I want to close, because Jackie's presentation has so powerfully reminded me, at least, of the duty we owe to each other when we try to cover these things and try to inform people around the world. We can't forget who we are. We can't forget we're human. We can't forget that we owe duties to each other as human beings. And I think what Jackie has said in so many of her comments today has reminded us of just how vulnerable we are, of how important it is to remember who we are, even when we're in the most grave of danger, or even when we're in the most remarkable of circumstances. We have to come away remembering that we are all human.
Mhm.
So I think that's very, very important. Thank you, Jackie, for this wonderful presentation. It was really extremely powerful, and I think it's given us a lot to think about. So
Thank you
I
for the
think
opportunity.
you're very, very welcome. You're very, very welcome. So I think, Tony, I think that wraps us up. We're trying to get to a hard stop at 1:30. So I appreciate all of this. Thank you, everybody, for being here and with us today. It was great to see people. I really enjoyed that. And even if I couldn't see people, it was great to have the chance to hear voices. I've seen it. Ingrid Oh, that's Ingrid clapping down here. That's I think Jackie does deserve a round of
Oh,
applause.
no, not me. No.
Oh, for sure,
Everybody
for
there.
sure. So there we go. I am grateful to Ingrid for starting that particular wave. So thank you all. Anyway, with that done, I think Jackie Belzic, we can stop the recording, and Tony and Jackie, you're off the hook now, and everybody else, have a good day, have a good evening, and we'll see you later on. Okay.
Stay